it's good to know that we have these experiences with divine life in our day-to-day life. And depending upon the messages we've received, depending upon the formation we've had, depending upon our own ways of thinking and being in the world, then we translate those experiences, and that is what creates our understanding of God. And so often in the church, when we hear these stories, like the story we just heard today, it sounds a bit confusing to us. And in some cases, some traditions, Christian traditions, have utilized those stories as a way to really do some really harmful things in the lives of people like you and I. And in today's story, it's a God who seems to be playing games with us. It's a God who seems to be testing us to get his own kick out of it. It's a God who then creates trouble for humanity to prove a point to this person that's coming alongside this God. And so that when we hear it in the church, it perks our ears. In some traditions, they don't even deal with it, right? They ignore the text that you just heard. But in other traditions like ours, we should actually tackle that text and begin to shine a light on it and ask the question, what's God got to do with it? So in today's story, it's a known story to so many, even in popular culture. It's a story of Job, a good guy that has really bad things happen to him when bad things happen to good people, you might say. And according to the book, to this ancient story, Job is right. Job has done great things. He's been a righteous person, a good person. And in some real ways, there's a little bit of messaging there too, that because of his goodness, he's been blessed beyond anyone's wildest imaginations. And so now this mythic story has a twist, which is that God then sees this guy and God calls over one of the folks in God's own court, right? This is like a royal court of the divine. This one's name is the Satan, the adversary, not the pitchfork devil guy. This is a different kind of guy. This guy is the guy whose whole role is to be watchful of humanity, to make sure humans are doing what they're supposed to do. I mean, this is a mythic story, isn't it? And so then they get into this conversation, right? Which is like, hey, have you seen my guy Job? He's a cool dude. Look how faithful he is to me. And this guy's like, yeah, I mean, he's the cynic, right? He's got, yeah, you're right. He's a great guy, but of course he is. Look how much you've blessed him. If you took away this stuff, he would curse you, says the Satan. And so all of a sudden then there's this game that is created, right? God says, I'm going to prove you wrong. And all sorts of calamity happens. I mean, he loses his children. He loses his property. He loses his wealth. He even loses his relation to his spouse. Because remember, his spouse sees all that's happening around and said, why don't you just curse God and die? His friends turn out not to be so friendly after all. It's a total disaster. What are we to do here? It's this the God we believe in? The God that toys with us and plays with us? Maybe you're going through a difficult moment right now. Maybe in a relationship, or maybe a tragedy has struck, or maybe a job has been lost, or maybe the bank account is getting in the negative, or maybe just maybe you're worried about the world and you see all that's happening in the world, all the tragedy, all the strife, all the enmity, all the violence, all the pain, and you're just weary and worn, and maybe for a moment you, like these ancients, are wondering, what's God got to do with it? And I wouldn't blame you for that. That's one of the great questions of humanity in light of God. And yet here's here's what I want us to think about together. These ancients were like us. They were living their lives and they were observing the reality of humanity and the reality of creation. That things happen in our lives. They were also responding to a certain wisdom of the day that so easily said that if you did the right thing, God will bless you, and if you did the wrong thing, God will curse you, and that's just the way the world works. So in light of that kind of weird wisdom, these ancient storytellers were responding with a different narrative, which is sometimes bad things do happen to good people. You can do all the right things, and then just due to the reality of humanity and life, bad things can happen. The great mystery that is this life of ours, by the accidents of the universe, you and I might end up in a really difficult place. Here's where I will take a different position from the ancient storytellers. This is not God's doing. So if you're struggling today, that is not God's doing. God is not testing you. If you're down and out today, that is not God's doing. If you're suffering, that is not God's doing. And yes, it would be wonderful to say, why doesn't God help me in this very moment? And I too, I join you in that effort. I wish that God will break into history and save you in this moment and take you away from your suffering. And I don't know the mysteries of who God is in that sense. All I know is one thing, that in the midst of your suffering, God is. That in the midst of your pain, God is. That in the midst of your struggle, God is. That in the midst of your difficult circumstance, God is. God is present with you, alongside you. God is giving you that sense of what you might need to get through. And even if it seems cyclical to you, even if it looks like it looked for Job, that was one bad thing after the other happening all around him, that's not God testing, that is not God causing it. Instead, God is alongside you in your full humanity, in this created order of ours that has these elements of pain and grief and struggle and strife. The presence of divine life that's sealed inside of you in your soul is there with you in this moment. If you pay attention, that seed might begin to birth hope, possibility, imagination. That seed might begin to birth joy and pain. That seed of divine life might begin to birth companioning, might begin to birth a pathway that maybe you've never seen before. That seed might begin to give you a certain sense of security in the midst of adversity, of orientation in the midst of disorientation. This God is present in the mystery that they are. With you, God with us. Not testing, not wishing us harm, not a God who forgets, a God who grieves, a God who knows, God with us. That's what God's got to do with it. God's own presence sealed in us and in all of creation. So today, look up, rise up, pay attention. Divine life visiting today. Thanks be to God. Amen.